You're right. I don't need to prove anything. She picked up her brush again, examining the canvas with fresh eyes. But I want him to see. I want him to understand that every assumption he made about me, every pitying look, every dismissive comment was wrong. Not because I need his validation, but because he needs to learn that judging people based on appearances and temporary circumstances is a mistake. Over the next week, Jenny threw herself into work with renewed energy. She completed 2 major pieces, finalized the details for the Lausanne exhibition, and had 3 successful meetings with potential collectors. Vincent Cross, delighted by her growing reputation and amused by her wedding plan, immediately offered his jet for the occasion. "My dear," he'd said over lunch at his estate, "anyone who can create art that moves the soul as yours does deserves to make a memorable entrance. Besides, I've always believed that karma has a sense of theater." The day before the wedding, Jenny stood in her walk-in closet, considering her options. Not the designer gowns that now filled half the space, but something simpler. She chose an elegant navy dress, understated but perfectly tailored, paired with the diamond earrings she'd bought herself after her first $100,000 sale. Not flashy, not desperate for attention, just confident. Patricia called one more time. The bidding closed. Digital Dreamscape sold for $375,000. "Jenny, you've officially joined the top tier of contemporary artists. How does it feel?" Jenny looked around her studio, at the life she'd built from nothing but talent, determination, and the courage to bet on herself when everyone else, especially Marcus, had told her she was making a mistake. "It feels," she said slowly, "like I'm finally ready to close that chapter completely." When the tables turn. The Harbor View estate gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its manicured lawns rolling down to the private marina where yachts bobbed gently in the water. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an elaborate floral arch that must have cost more than most people's cars. Chelsea Brooks, the wedding coordinator, checked her clipboard for the 100th time, her headset crackling with updates from the catering staff. "The champagne tower is ready. The string quartet is in position, and the photographer wants to know if we're still on schedule," she murmured into her microphone, watching as guests began to arrive in luxury vehicles. Marcus stood near the groom's suite, adjusting his custom-tailored tuxedo in the mirror. Owen appeared beside him, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. "You ready for this?" Owen asked, though his tone suggested he was asking more than just about the ceremony. "I was born ready." Marcus grinned, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "Have you seen the guest list? Half the city's elite is here. This is going to be the social event of the season." Natalie swept into the room in a flurry of white silk and tulle, her makeup artist trailing behind her. "Marcus, darling, the photographer needs you for pre-ceremony shots. And did you see my latest post? We're already trending on 3 platforms." Father Gregory Mitchell, the officiant, watched the chaos from a quiet corner of the estate. In his 30 years of performing weddings, he'd learned to read couples, to sense which marriages were built on solid foundations and which were constructed from more fragile materials. This one, he thought, had all the appearance of stability, but something felt off, like a beautiful building with a cracked foundation. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock. By 3:30, nearly 200 guests had arrived, filling the chairs and mingling near the open bar. Marcus worked the crowd like the natural networker he was, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, occasionally glancing at his watch. At 3:45, Chelsea's headset crackled with an urgent message from security at the front gate. "Ms. Brooks, we have a situation. There's a private jet landing at the estate's airstrip. That's impossible," Chelsea hissed into her microphone. "We don't have an airstrip. The marina has a small landing area for seaplanes and helicopters. A jet just requested permission to land there." Marcus overheard the exchange and frowned. Who would be arriving by private jet? "Everyone important is already here." The guests near the marina began to murmur and point. The sleek white aircraft descended with practiced precision, touching down on the waterfront landing area that was technically rated for such arrivals, but rarely used. The crowd's attention shifted entirely from the wedding setup to this unexpected arrival. The jet's door opened, and a figure emerged. Owen saw her first. He grabbed Marcus's arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. Marcus! That's Jenny! What? Marcus turned and the color drained from his face. Jennifer Foster descended the jet's stairs with unhurried grace. She wore the navy dress with an elegance that needed no embellishment, her hair styled simply, her jewelry minimal but clearly expensive. Behind her, Vincent Cross emerged, the famous collector whose face was recognizable to anyone who followed the art world. Chelsea rushed toward them, her professional smile fixed in place despite her confusion. "Welcome to the Bennett Crane wedding. May I direct you to your seats?" "Thank you," Jenny said warmly. "I believe I'm on the guest list. Jennifer Foster." The name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Jenny, Marcus's ex-wife. Jenny, who supposedly couldn't afford a decent car. Jenny, who'd just arrived in a private jet with one of the wealthiest art collectors in the world. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile the image before him with the mental picture he'd carried for 5 years. This couldn't be the same woman he'd seen in the coffee shop parking lot. This couldn't be the struggling artist he'd pitied. Natalie appeared at his side, her eyes narrowed. "Is that your ex-wife? The one you said was barely making rent." Jenny walked toward them, Vincent at her side. The crowd parted automatically, sensing drama, everyone's phones already out and recording. "Marcus," Jenny said, her voice pleasant and entirely composed. "Congratulations on your wedding. The venue is lovely." Up close, Marcus could see it clearly now. The quiet confidence, the subtle signs of wealth. The way Vincent Cross stayed protectively near her, not as a date but as a colleague, a friend, someone who respected her. "Jenny, what are you doing here?" The words came out more accusatory than he'd intended. "You sent me an invitation," she replied simply. "I thought it would be rude not to attend." Owen stepped forward, always the diplomat. "It's good to see you, Jenny. You look well." "Thank you, Owen. I am well." "Very well, actually." She turned to Vincent. "This is Vincent Cross. Vincent, this is my ex-husband, Marcus, his fiancée, Natalie, and our mutual friend, Owen." Vincent shook hands with mechanical politeness, though his expression suggested he'd already formed opinions about Marcus based on Jenny's stories. Natalie found her voice, her influencer instincts kicking in. "That's quite an entrance. Private jet. How very dramatic." Jenny smiled, and there was steel beneath the warmth. Vincent was kind enough to offer his jet. "We just came from a meeting in Chicago about my upcoming exhibition at the Lausanne Museum. It made sense to fly directly here rather than deal with commercial airlines." The words landed like bombs. Exhibition, museum, private jet as a casual convenience. Marcus's world tilted. "Exhibition? You're showing at Lausanne?" "Among other places." Jenny's tone was matter-of-fact, not boastful. "The art world has been surprisingly welcoming, but I didn't come here to talk about work. This is your day, Marcus. You and Natalie should be the center of attention." But she was the center of attention now, and everyone knew it. Phones were still recording. Guests were whispering. Natalie's face had gone rigid with the realization that her perfectly planned, perfectly photographed wedding was being upstaged. Father Gregory Mitchell watched it all unfold with the quiet wisdom of someone who'd seen human nature in all its forms. He approached Jenny with a gentle smile. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Father Gregory, officiating today's ceremony. Lovely to meet you," Jenny said, and her warmth seemed genuine. "I hope we're not disrupting things. We can take our seats." As she moved toward the guest chairs, Marcus suddenly grabbed her arm. His touch was desperate. Nothing like the dismissive superiority he'd shown at the restaurant. "How?" he asked, his voice low. "How did this happen?" Jenny looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. For a moment, something like pity flickered in her eyes. "The same way anything happens, Marcus. Hard work, talent, and the courage to believe in myself even when nobody else did." She gently removed his hand. "Especially when nobody else did." She walked away, leaving Marcus standing there as Chelsea frantically tried to reorganize the ceremony, as Natalie scrolled through her phone with increasing panic, seeing the videos already going viral with captions like, "Ex-wife arrives in private jet to her ex's wedding," and "The ultimate revenge entrance." The wedding proceeded, but the energy had shifted. Marcus stumbled over his vows. Natalie's smile looked painted on. The guests were more interested in catching glimpses of Jenny, who sat quietly near the back with Vincent, genuinely seeming to wish them well. At the reception, as Marcus and Natalie performed their first dance, Jenny prepared to leave. She found Owen near the bar. "It was good to see you, Owen. You were always kind to me." Owen looked miserable. "Jenny, I'm sorry. For how Marcus talked about you, for not standing up for you more. You deserved better." "We all deserve better than we sometimes give ourselves credit for," she said gently. "Be well, Owen." As the jet lifted off from the marina, Jenny looked down at the estate, at the party continuing below, at Marcus, surely watching the sky and finally understanding that he'd never really known her at all. Vincent poured them both champagne. "Feel better?" "Actually, yes," Jenny admitted. "Not because I proved him wrong, but because I finally proved to myself that his opinion never mattered. I didn't need his validation 5 years ago, and I certainly don't need it now." Her phone buzzed. Patricia, with news of another collector interested in commissioning work. Jenny smiled and turned her attention to the future, leaving Marcus Bennett and all his judgments somewhere far below, growing smaller by the second, until they finally disappeared entirely from view. Back at the reception, Marcus stood alone on the terrace, watching the jet's lights fade into the evening sky. Natalie was inside, managing the social media fallout. The guests were gossiping. His perfect day had become the story of someone else's triumph. Father Gregory found him there. "Weddings have a way of teaching us things we weren't expecting to learn." "What am I supposed to learn from this?" Marcus asked bitterly. The priest considered the question. "Perhaps that people are more than the moments we see them in. Perhaps that success comes in many forms. Or perhaps simply that pride and judgment are heavy burdens to carry, and eventually, they cost us more than we realize." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew the priest was right, and the knowing hurt more than anything else that day. The wedding continued, but everyone would remember it not for the expensive flowers, or the champagne tower, or the trending hashtags, but for the lesson learned when Jenny Foster arrived in a private jet and departed with her dignity intact, leaving behind only the echo of what might have been if Marcus had chosen to see her clearly all those years ago. Pride before the fall. Marcus Bennett swirled the wine in his glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the candlelight at Romano's, the most expensive restaurant in the city. Across the white tablecloth, his best friend Owen Tucker was checking, his phone, occasionally glancing up with an amused smirk that Marcus had learned to recognize over their 15 years of friendship. "Did you see her car in the parking lot?" Marcus asked, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never really struggled. "That ancient Toyota is practically held together with duct tape and prayers." Owen looked up from his screen. "Who are we talking about?" "Jenny, my ex-wife. She was leaving the coffee shop when we pulled in." Marcus took a long sip of his wine, a vintage that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. "Still dressing like she shops at thrift stores, still driving that embarrassment on wheels. I swear, some people just can't get their act together." The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the soft clink of silverware against china. This was Marcus's world now, a far cry from the modest apartment he'd shared with Jenny during their marriage 7 years ago. Back then, he'd been building his real estate empire from the ground up, and she'd been trying to make it as an artist. He'd made it. She clearly hadn't. Owen set down his phone, his expression shifting to something resembling concern. "You know, maybe we shouldn't talk about her." "That's ancient history, man. You're getting married to Natalie in 3 weeks. "Exactly." Marcus grinned, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And speaking of which, wait until you see what we've planned. The venue alone cost more than Jenny probably makes in a year, maybe 2 years. The truth was, Marcus had been thinking about Jenny more than he cared to admit since he'd spotted her earlier. Not because he missed her, but because her continued struggles somehow validated his decision to divorce her 5 years ago. She'd wanted to pursue her art full-time, and he'd wanted someone more practical, more ambitious, Someone like Natalie who understood the value of networking, appearances, and social status. His phone buzzed. A text from Natalie with a string of excited emojis and a photo of champagne flutes. She was out with her bridesmaids, probably posting every moment to her 100,000 followers on social media. That was another thing Jenny had never understood. In their world, image was everything. The photographer alone is costing us 20 grand, Marcus continued, ignoring Owen's obvious discomfort with the conversation. And Natalie found this incredible designer in Milan who's flying in just to do the floral arrangements. The whole thing's going to be featured in Metropolitan Bride magazine. Owen nodded slowly. That's great, Marcus. Really. But maybe tone down the comparison to Jenny? It's not a competition. Isn't it, though? Marcus flagged down their server and ordered another bottle of the expensive wine. I mean, look at where we both ended up. I worked hard, made smart decisions, and now I'm about to marry a beautiful woman in a wedding that people will talk about for years. Meanwhile, Jenny's still painting pictures that nobody wants to buy, driving a car that should have died a decade ago, and probably eating ramen for dinner most nights. The server returned with the wine, and Marcus watched as the cork was pulled with a soft pop. Everything in his life had that same sense of smooth perfection now. His penthouse apartment overlooked the harbor. His car was a German luxury model that turned heads. His real estate company had closed 3 major deals in the past 6 months alone. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that just a few miles away, in a converted warehouse loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and original exposed brick, Jenny was standing in front of a canvas that would sell for $200,000 before the week was out. He didn't know that her ancient Toyota was actually a car she kept for sentimental reasons, while a Tesla and a vintage Porsche sat in her private garage. He didn't know that her thrift store clothes were actually high-end designer pieces. She preferred because they were comfortable, not because she couldn't afford anything else. And he certainly didn't know that in 2.5 weeks she would arrive at his wedding in a way that would shatter every assumption he'd ever made about her. Owen cleared his throat. So, about the bachelor party next weekend, I was thinking we'd keep it low-key. Maybe just dinner and drinks? Marcus laughed, finally shifting his attention away from thoughts of his ex-wife. Owen, my friend, nothing about the next 3 weeks is going to be low-key. This is my moment. Everything has to be perfect, impressive, and absolutely unforgettable. He raised his glass in a toast to himself, to his success, to his perfect life. Pride, as they say, comes before a fall, and Marcus Bennett's fall was going to be spectacular. The Empire She Built. Jennifer Foster stood in front of the massive canvas, her brush hovering in the air as she considered the next stroke. The late afternoon sun streamed through the warehouse windows, casting long shadows across her studio space. This painting, a swirling fusion of digital projection and traditional oils, was destined for a tech billionaire's private collection in Singapore. Jenny, we need to talk about the offer from the Lausanne Museum, Derek Hall called from the doorway. Her business manager was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from decades in the art world. He'd found her 3 years ago at a small gallery showing, back when she was still painting in her cramped studio apartment, still reeling from the divorce, still wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake choosing art over security. She set down her brush and turned to face him. What are they offering now? $250,000 for a 6-month exhibition. They want 12 pieces, and they're willing to cover all transportation and insurance costs. Derek walked into the studio, careful to avoid the various canvases, in different stages of completion that occupied nearly every surface. That's in addition to the commission from the Frankfurt collector and the corporate installation for Henderson Tech. Jenny wiped her hands on her paint-stained apron, the same one she'd bought when she and Marcus were still married. Back then, it had seemed like an extravagant purchase at $40. Now she spent more than that on a single tube of specialty pigment. Schedule a call with them for tomorrow, she said, moving to wash her brushes in the industrial sink she'd installed last year. "But I need to clear something from my calendar first." Derek raised an eyebrow. He knew her well enough by now to sense when something personal was interfering with business. "What's going on?" Jenny dried her hands slowly, considering how much to share. "My ex-husband is getting married in 2 weeks. I got the invitation months ago. Are you actually thinking of going?" Derek's surprise was evident. "Jenny, you have the Henderson installation deadline, the Lausanne pieces to complete, and Patricia has 3 potential buyers flying in from Dubai specifically to see your new work." "I know." She walked over to her desk, buried under sketches and color swatches, and pulled out the heavy cream envelope she'd tucked into a drawer. The invitation was embossed with gold lettering, announcing the union of Marcus Bennett and Natalie Crane at the prestigious Harborview Estate. "But I think I need to do this." The truth was more complicated than she could easily explain. For 5 years, she'd carried the weight of Marcus's dismissal, his constant implications that she'd never amount to anything, that leaving him had been a mistake she'd regret forever. Even after her success began to build, even after her first $50,000 sale, even after Vincent Cross, the legendary art collector, had declared her the most exciting new voice in contemporary art, some part of her still heard Marcus's voice telling her she wasn't enough. Her phone rang. Patricia Wong's name flashed on the screen. "Jenny, darling, I have extraordinary news." Patricia's voice was breathless with excitement. Her gallery representative had been instrumental in connecting her with the right collectors, the ones who didn't just buy art as investment, but truly understood it. "The piece you finished last month, Digital Dreamscape? We have 3 buyers in a bidding war. It's up to $320,000 and climbing." Jenny sat down heavily in her desk chair. $320,000. For a single painting. She thought about Marcus at that restaurant, probably at this very moment, sipping expensive wine and congratulating himself on his success while pitying her imagined poverty. "Accept the highest offer," she told Patricia. "And Patricia, I need a favor." After she hung up, Derek was watching her with an expression somewhere between concern and curiosity. "You're really going to that wedding, aren't you?" "I am." Jenny stood up, squaring her shoulders. "But I'm not going to slink in through the back door like I'm ashamed. I'm not going to pretend I'm still the struggling artist he left behind." "What exactly are you planning?" A small smile played at the corners of Jenny's mouth. "Do you remember Vincent Cross mentioning that he keeps a private jet at the municipal airport?" Derek's eyes widened. "Jenny, no! That's too much. You don't need to prove anything to this guy."